Mental Maps is brought to you by Aruka Well. Aruka Well is a virtual holistic mental health service providing psychiatric evaluations, holistic interventions, and when needed, medication management. For more information, check out Aruka Well at www.arukawell.co. That's www.arukawell.co. Welcome back to Mental Maps. As always, I hope this finds you well, no matter what season of life you're in. I'm really excited about this content and this discussion today because I think it's very applicable not only to your own life, but also if you're like helping others and how to help others kind of navigate this world. And so what we're going to talk about today is nutrients, right? Like vitamins and minerals and just like macro and micronutrients, right? A lot of this content comes from some writing I've been doing and some different research I've been working on. And so I thought, man, this would be really a good podcast. It kind of felt podcast worthy, if you will, right? And so I wanted to share it with you because I think it's really helpful. Now, that being said, if you haven't listened to the podcast I had with Sean Wells, I highly recommend you go back and check it out because he does a phenomenal job of telling us like how to navigate the world of supplements and how to find the right ones and the companies and all those things. So definitely, get done and listen to this and go back and listen to that before you go buy anything out there from a supplement perspective, because he gives us a lot of really good advice in that world, and I think it's very helpful to you. However, I do think that what we're going to talk about today is really important for just how our body and our brain works, right? And so that's what we're going to focus on today. And it can feel a little sciencey, right? So I want you to hang tight with me, especially at the start of this, because if you're not a science person, you may feel like, oh my gosh, I'm in biology class again. And you're not. Well, you kind of are just for a little bit. But it's really, really important to kind of get a good foundation of what's happening with these nutrients and how they impact our body and our brain, right? So hang with me. If it feels kind of lectury too, hang tight, because I think it's really important just to know, and I think you're also going to gain some knowledge and some information that's really important and you may find interesting, right? So let's kind of get our base level and our foundation first. So what is a nutrient, right? Like we hear nutrition, we hear nutrients. So what we think of in a nutrient is this is kind of, to be honest, stuff, right? And this stuff is what we need to build in our body and brain, build and maintain. So nutrition is all about the maintaining and the building of the human body, right? And so within that, in these nutrients, if you will, we have macronutrients and micronutrients, right? So macronutrients being the stuff that we need in large amounts, right? And so we consume it in large amounts, like proteins or carbohydrates or fats. Those three are really the main macronutrients that we consume, right? Whereas we have micronutrients that we consume, but we don't need a lot of them, right? It takes just a little bit to get what we need, right? And so micronutrients are really broken down into two parts. We have our vitamins and our minerals, right? And so our vitamins are these, almost managers and regulators of so many different functions of the body and the brain, right? And so we know there's really 13 core essential vitamins that our body needs, but our brain needs just a handful of those that are important for it. However, all of them work together, and we'll talk about a little bit more about that. Whereas in the world of minerals, we know there's so many minerals that our body looks at and really requires just to maintain functioning. However, we know there's a handful that are important in the brain, right? So we have these macronutrients, we have these micronutrients. We are dependent of consuming most of these from the outside world, right? So we have to consume them through our food or our water or through the soil that our food grows in. And so when we consume it, then our body is able to take it and use it, and we maintain life in that way, right? And so there's a belief that many times when people get unwell, not every time, but many times when people become unwell, some of these vitamins and minerals are off, right? And so that's really where the concept of supplementing and watching your nutrition and all that comes from, right? I'm a 90s kid. I remember when Flintstone vitamins came out and everybody was taking them, right? And whether it's because you were a picky eater or because your mom read a magazine article, like they were just there, right? And every kid was taking them. And I think to a point, none of us really knew why, outside of it was supposed to be quote unquote good for us, right? What we knew is that ultimately our food, especially in the 90s, and this can be somewhat controversial, our food was getting to a place, even if you were maintaining adequate nutrients, some of the nutrition wasn't there like it used to be, right? Whether that was from the soil that our food comes from, whether it's from the sources of our food overall, whether it was the consumption of more processed foods like TV dinners and Hot Pockets and pizza bagels, and less of the other stuff. Like, no matter what it was, we knew that there were some vitamins and minerals and macronutrients missing, and so we found ourselves using those things, right? But what's unfortunate is as we've kind of moved into this world, many people have found themselves kind of dependent on these to maintain life. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about that as well. But let's kind of dive just a little bit deeper into science before we move out into application, right? So why does this matter to your brain? I mean, we get it for the body, the rest of the body, right? Like if I need to build muscle, I need protein. Like, I mean, that's what it's kind of all about, right? But what does it mean for your brain? So if I were to open up your skull and take your brain out, and you're looking at your brain, and we were to figure out like what it's made up of, right? It's 60% fat, which is kind of interesting, about 60% fat. So over 50% of your brain is made up of good fat, right? Not like fat you get from eating too much pizza and, not working out, but good fat. It's 20% carbohydrates, right? And so when we think of carbohydrates, we're not thinking just like bread. We're thinking energy, right? In the world of nutrition, in the world of the brain, carbohydrates are energy, right? And in the world of protein, 8%. 8% of the brain is protein, and that's really like your building blocks. So you have fat, which is like energy sourcing, helping building, all these things, and that's kind of what the brain's made up of, right? And then it's 20% more of like carbohydrate-driven energy, 8% of protein, and then 12% of this like water-like material that we have in the brain, right? And in the world of health, no matter where you kind of fall at, a lot of people believe, including myself, that the body and the brain really like what it's made up of. So we love to eat, our body desires to consume foods that the nutrients are in that we need, right? So a perfect example is your brain. We know your brain really needs fats. It's made up of fats. And so that's why you see how fat content like stuff like omega-3s are so helpful for your brain health. We all remember when omega-3s got popular in like cardiac health, primarily in the world of like supplementing. However, we know that this can kind of be somewhat controversial now in the world of cardiac, but we know that it's super important in the world of your brain. We know that 60%, 20% is omega-3s. So if you're not consuming enough omega-3s in your diet, you're going to be lacking that in your brain. And so because of that, you're lacking the stuff that not only that your brain's made up of, but that's also managing your brain overall, right? So from a macronutrient perspective, that's what you're seeing, right? From a micronutrient perspective, it's a little bit more detailed and a little bit more selective. And so here's what I mean by that, right? And we're not going to get super sciencey, but just remember in the world of the brain, a lot of what's happening in there, your emotions, your thoughts, the drive, motivation, living life, focus, all of these things that are kind of happening in your brain, right, are really driven out of these concepts or these things called neurotransmitters, right? And so neurotransmitters kind of help signaling in the brain. It kind of helps your brain talk to itself, and it creates these reactions based on where it lands, right? And so we know that dopamine is a very popular neurotransmitter. It finds itself in a lot of like Instagram videos and TikTok videos. If you still have TikTok, like all those different things, right? It finds itself in there. But ultimately, we know that the transmitters themselves aren't all what it's made out to be. There's other processes going on too, but it is important and it creates other actions in the brain. Well, these neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin are very dependent on our nutrients to be made. We don't just make serotonin out of thin air. Then it's created through this process through the brain that's very dependent on a couple minerals and one vitamin. One of those vitamins is B6. And so if I'm really low in B6, so I'm not consuming enough B6, I'm going to have problems converting my precursor into serotonin, right? So I can take all the medicine in the world. I can do all the things that I need to do. I can go to the gym and do all this stuff. But if my food is low or my B6 is low, I'm going to have a tough time creating that. And so that we do believe that there's a handful of people out there who their mental health issues are driven by this, right? It's driven because they don't have enough nutrition in their brain to help make these neurotransmitters. So that's what we're thinking about from a micro level, right? So from a macro level, we're thinking of it not only from just like your body overall, but then just your brain health, right? Like the brain itself. And then from a micro level, we're thinking of it not only from that, but then also the intricacies in these neural connections, right? And so if we believe that certain people may be low in certain vitamins and they become unwell, how do you know what vitamins to take? Right? In a world where there's so much noise about vitamins, and minerals, and nutrients, and this diet, and that diet, and this meal plan, like how do you know what you need for your brain? Right? I think first and foremost, remembering that all vitamins and minerals and macronutrients work together. Right? To say that one vitamin is more important than the other is not fair, right? Because it's this beautiful orchestrated dance that your body and your brain's kind of operating on, right? So that's where we kind of see foods to be the most helpful because we have like superfoods that have the most in them, right? However, we know that certain supplements also have a lot of those in them, but we do know that you've got to have all of them in there. However, we do know there's a handful that are really important to your brain, right? And so we're going to kind of unpack this a little bit. So we'll kind of go with our macronutrient first, right? So remember we were talking a lot about fats and fatty acids and those kind of things. And remember we talked about how about 20% of your brain is made up of fat, or 60% is made up of fat. We know about 20% is made up of what we call like polyunsaturated fatty acids, or PUFAs, which is another name to call it. But what we think of in this world is primarily omega-3s and a little bit of omega-6, right? And so just knowing that, like, you know, when you are taking that omega-3 supplement or you're taking a fish oil, what that means is this is the oil from really a fatty fish, primarily salmon or tuna, right? And so we see where these foods have very high amounts of omega-3s in them. And so because of that, when we eat them, we can regulate a lot of that. And we have seen where omega-3s alone are really important in just not only overall brain health, but depression. There's really great research to show an increased risk of thoughts of wanting to hurt yourself and low levels of omega-3 in your body. Right now, does that mean that every person who's suicidal has omega-3 problems? No. But we do know that omega-3s are really important in that way, right? And so if you're not eating salmon, if you're not eating tuna, or seaweed is another one, if you're not eating any of those, you're going to be low in this. We know salmon's the best because it's got the most omega-3s in it and it's just more bioavailable and it's just easier converted and there's a lot more concepts in that. But we just know that you need your omega-3s. Omega-6s are a little bit more controversial, right, in the world of these macronutrients. And the reason for that is you can have too much omega-6, right? Because omega-6s can be what's called a pro-inflammatory. They're very inflammatory driven. This is why seed oils get a really bad rap. This is why soybeans can get a bad rap. Sometimes people try to use this as a way to give meats and eggs a bad rap. You can get too much omega-6s, right? Primarily from seed oils. And that's why you see a lot of people talking about seed oils, not only because of some other carcinogens and stuff that's created from, but from a brain health perspective, too much seed oils cause inflammation in the brain. And so because of that, you're going to have issues. However, if you have no omega-6s, if you're not getting those omega-6s maybe from your eggs or your meats or even nuts, then you're going to have issues with neuronal growth, right? Primarily like your nerves growing. So from a fat perspective, you're looking at it from the concept that the makeup of your brain in these macronutrients are really important. So can I consume salmon, tuna, or seaweed? Can I consume some nuts or some meats to be able to obtain the omega-3s and 6s and fats that I need for my brain? We know from a carbohydrate perspective, not all carbohydrates are created equal, right? You know, a perfect example is like the running a mile perspective. Running a mile uphill and running a mile downhill aren't the same. And food is very similar to that, right? And so we know carbohydrates specifically are similar to that. Let's say you're getting 20 grams of carbohydrates from a banana compared to 20 carbohydrates from a pizza. It's two very different. However, one of the knocks is when we look on the back of those ingredient labels or we Google it, it's still just the same. And so we're like, well, we can just eat that. But what we realize is that's not the same. And so when we think about the carbohydrates in our brain and what we're needing is a way to get energy sources, right? Now, a lot of people like to say you can get enough fats to maintain energy source, and that's not my job here to tell you what's right or wrong. But there is something to be said for finding a way to consuming some kind of carbohydrate, right? Whether that is from a fruit or a vegetable or maybe a really healthy grain, if that's part of your food plan. What we do know is that you need some kind of energy source, right? And then, of course, we know what proteins, whether it be meats or legumes, that can really help you get some good protein in. And once again, not all sources are the same. But from a macronutrient perspective, that's what we're thinking of. From a micronutrient perspective, there's really a handful of vitamins that we care about, right? So you have your B vitamins, which, there's numerous B vitamins. There's really 6 of them that we see in the world of mental health and brain health, right? That's B1, B3, B5, B6, B9, and B12, right? And so a lot of times if you eat like processed foods or you drink like, energy drinks or electrolytes, that kind of stuff, or like supplements, you'll see it say like B1 X amount, B6 X amount. And what that means is they've taken like a synthetic version of that, extracted it from something or made it themselves and put it into that food source, right? In an attempt to create enough of these to maintain your adequate health, right? But we see where each of these B vitamins are really important in the creation of neurotransmitters, like we were talking about before, which helps regulate mood. It's important in the overall creation of new neural connections. It does so many concepts in the brain. So having 1, 3, 5, 6, 9, and 12 are so important in just your brain health, right? We know vitamin C is very important in your brain health. Vitamin C, we used to think a lot about it from like an immune perspective, right? You get sick, take vitamin C, right? But we know that vitamin C is also very important in just overall brain functioning, right? The creation of new neurotransmitters, the modulation of new neurotransmitters, and then like decreasing inflammation in the brain, right? And just kind of improving the oxygenation of the brain. We know where vitamin D is really important as well, and it's kind of the 6th one, or the third main one we'll talk about. We have your 6 B vitamins, vitamin C is 7, and then vitamin D is your 8th one we'll talk about. And that is a hot topic because vitamin D comes from the sun. And I'm not going to go on a tangent about the sun and what that looks like, but what we do know is the sun is important. We know you need to get sun. We know that vitamin D is more bioavailable from the sun, right? We also know that vitamin D is so important that there's certain parts of our brain that have receptors for vitamin D, right? We know vitamin D is involved in the creation of new neural connections as well as regulating neurotransmitters. But just knowing that getting adequate vitamin D is really important. And we do see where people who are low in vitamin D don't feel too good, right? Their energy's low, or they have memory issues or focus issues. And we see where they start supplementing it, or they start getting more sun, or they get their diet improved. They start to feel better, right? So those are those vitamins that we're thinking of. From a mineral perspective, we have really 6 minerals that we care about in the world of mental health, right? And that's calcium, copper, iron, selenium, magnesium, and zinc, right? And so if you were to go to the store, walk down the aisle, and you see like calm supplements or help get you to sleep supplements, you'll see zinc and magnesium in a lot of them. And the reason for that is zinc and magnesium decreases the excitability of the brain. So that's why they find themselves in supplements that help you go to sleep and that kind of stuff, because they are calming down the excitability of the brain. So if you're eating adequate zinc and magnesium, probably at baseline, your brain is just a little bit calmer. And then we know if you supplement a little bit more, you eat a little bit more, maybe you'll sleep a little bit better. And then we know if you take a little bit before bed, sometimes you can feel a little bit better and sleep a little bit better. So that's where we kind of see these minerals be important. You also see like iron. We all talk a lot about iron, and you see where people who don't get a lot of iron through like their diet, they find themselves having a lot of low energy and kind of struggling with their mood. Something you kind of see there. And so a lot of those people have to supplement with iron just to kind of regulate it better, right? So calcium, copper, iron, selenium, magnesium, and zinc. Those are your 6 minerals that we care the most about in the world of brain health. Are there more minerals? For sure. Do more minerals maybe do some stuff in the brain? Absolutely. But those 6 are the ones. So we have our 8 vitamins that we're thinking of and our 6 minerals. So now let's kind of move into applicability, right? How does all this matter to you? Well, I think the first thing is if you don't feel well, look at what you're eating. Because if we recognize that these vitamins and these minerals and these macronutrients are important to our brain health, are we getting those 8 vitamins? Are we getting those 6 minerals? Are we getting adequate fats, a version of a carbohydrate, and protein? If we're not, that's probably a great place to start. The amount of work I've done with people of just meeting them in a place of, let's just look at what we're eating. Now, sometimes I recognize, right, it is really hard to evaluate it. There's a lot in it. We're not going to unpack all that today. And then 2, sometimes when you're really down or you just don't feel, you don't even want to look at it, right? But there is a place where sometimes this is the driver to you're not feeling. Now, granted, I know many people who their diet's on point and they still get down, right? So I'm not saying this is a fix-all. However, if you don't feel right, look at what you're eating. Are you getting those 8 vitamins? Are you getting those 6 minerals that we discussed? Are you getting omega-3s in your diet? Are you getting good proteins? Are you getting a little bit more carbohydrates that are good? If you are, and you're still feeling well, then there's probably something different. But if you're not, making those changes are so important, right? And so within that, you may be saying like, well, what foods do I eat? I'm going to post some stuff on Instagram. If you follow our Instagram account like Mental Maps, of some different thing or some different foods you can eat. But one of the stuff that we see a lot of times in our world is stuff called superfoods, right? And so in the world of superfoods, what that means is it's a food that has a lot of the nutrients that we're looking for, right? Like a really good example is eggs, right? Eggs are just packed full of like B vitamins, right? So most of the B vitamins that we highlighted in the 6 you need for your brain are in eggs, right? We also see where vitamin D is in eggs. So it's just one of those superfoods, right? We also see where like certain fruits can be like a superfood, right? And so we just know that having these in your diet can be very helpful. So some of the foods that can be important, right? No matter what meal plan you're leaning into, some version of a fruit, right? Because we know that like acidic fruits have a lot of vitamin C in it. We know where a lot of these fruits have certain minerals in them, like really like magnesium, and you can see it sometimes, in certain fruits with like copper and maybe even calcium. There are certain ones out there that are just really important with that, right? So having good fruit in your diet, having a version of protein, right? And there is a discussion about like what does that look like if you don't eat meat. And so one, having legumes, which are like your beans, are really important. And then two, to be honest, you're probably going to have to supplement, right? If you're not feeling well on that meal plan, there's a good chance that you're low in these vitamins and minerals, and so in your macronutrients. So you're going to probably supplement with a B complex vitamin, an iron, probably some kind of zinc, just to build that up to where you can get to feeling a little bit better, right? So first, examining what you're eating. Second would be, can I take a supplement to improve that, right? Remember, it's called a supplement for a reason. It's supplemental. It's supplementing what you should be consuming in the world, right? And so a really great opportunity to do that is through really good micronutrients. As I said before, if you're trying to figure out what brands to use, go back and check out the Sean Wells episode because he can tell you a lot better I can. But one of the things that I will say is that ensuring that it's what we call like a broad spectrum micronutrient, right? So just ensure you're getting all the nutrients you need. And then if you're still having problems, you can start trying to figure out what vitamin is the most off, right? There are certain ways you can get that pulled, right? Like get it pulled in like a lab and those kind of things. Some places will pay for it, some won't. But just knowing that if you're off and your food's not doing what you need it to do, probably time to go like talk to somebody, right? Because that can be pretty helpful just to kind of figure out if there's something wrong. But from like just down home, what you can do right then, looking at your food, putting those foods in. If you know you're low on some stuff and you can't increase your food in any way, supplement with a vitamin. Or you're in a place in the world where you're just not getting good food, right? We know there's a lot of places in the world right now where it's really challenging, especially in our country, to get good food from good soil. And so because of that, you may have to supplement with like a really good broad spectrum micronutrient to get everything that you're needing, right? So don't believe that your vitamins are cure-all. Ultimately, food's a good place to start. But if you find yourself struggling with these experiences, supplement with a vitamin. If you know you're not eating that seaweed or that tuna or that salmon, get on an omega-3 supplement. I know for me, like I had a time in my life where I didn't consume a lot of carbohydrates, right? Like I was really living into like carnivore, and I also wasn't eating a lot of fruit either, right? And I wasn't purposely eating carnivore. I was just kind of something I was doing, and I felt really sluggish. And I noticed just adding that fruit into my diet was a big game changer, just like focus and concentration, right? I've seen people who like I've worked with who just start making some shifts in their diet to where maybe they're eating like more food or maybe they're eating just cleaner food, like healthier food, and they feel better. Like that sadness goes away or that perpetual anxiety goes away. So it's just something to think about as you kind of navigate this world. But just know that you can get it in your food, look at your food, and then if it's not coming from your food, then supplement with a really good supplement and focus on getting it all that broad spectrum, right? Rather than just taking a B12 or just getting a vitamin D. However, if you're still not feeling well, talking to a functional provider who can pull those labs to see where those levels are at can be super helpful in giving that, right? But one of the things I would say, and I tell people this a lot too, even if you go get it done, and let's say, like I've had people come to me before and like their vitamin D's low, right? There's probably a good chance that other vitamins are low too. So let's just go ahead and get our food right. Let's go ahead and start supplementing with a micronutrient supplement, like a broad spectrum one, and then let's see where you're at. Now, I do want to highlight there's a lot of reasons why you may not be absorbing nutrients the way you need to. We know there's like stomach issues and genetic issues that impact the way you absorb certain nutrients. But from the perspective of what we're talking about today, if you don't feel well, are you getting vitamin B1, B3, B5, B6, B9, and B12? Are you getting vitamin C? Are you getting vitamin D? Are you getting calcium? Are you getting copper? Are you getting iron? Are you getting selenium and magnesium and zinc? And are you getting omega-3s and good fats? Are you having a good source of carbohydrates? And are you getting protein? That is where to start in the world of trying to figure out what to do with these vitamins and minerals. And it's not a special meal plan. It's not a specific thing that you can pay $39.95 for online. It's not some crazy micronutrient supplement out there. That's the place to start for your brain, right? And then moving out of that. I know this can sound like a lot. Your head may be spinning right now as you're driving down the road or you're listening to this. But I really hope that you can kind of stop and kind of look at, if I'm not feeling well, is this going on in my life? But then also if I'm working with people and they're sitting across from me, could this be going on in their life? Right? Now, granted, there's a lot of people who don't feel well and you may not be feeling well, and your food is just a symptom of your problem. Right? It may be more stress related or genetic. There's a lot of reasons why. But starting with these vitamins and minerals and nutrients for your brain, man, it can be a game changer in just improving your overall health and creating the opportunity to feel well. So check it out. I would love if you have feedback for this, right? If you see where these have been really helpful to you, or maybe you have more questions, reach out to me, right? I'm at Mental Maps Podcast on Instagram. If you're looking to do more work into that world in your brain health, right, you can check out Aruka Well, which is a company that I have. There's so many other like functional health psych providers out there too. So don't get stuck kind of being in that world of not even addressing this, right? But I do think that looking at it can be very, very helpful for your health. So look what you're eating. And if it's helping you, keep doing it. But if it's not, probably time to make a shift.